Hi, I'm April. I'm a singer-songwriter and music teacher, and today we are going to be talking about how to play more than one instrument. So if you clicked this video and you're like, I don't know why I clicked this because I don't play any instruments, that is totally fine. I actually just did a video last week about beginner piano, so you can watch that right there if you would like to start playing one instrument. But for the rest of you, we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of learning more than one instrument, how to practice both instruments, and how to really economize all of that practice time. So first, we're going to get started by talking about the pros and cons. So personally, I am a multi-instrumentalist. I play the piano, the guitar, the ukulele, and my degree is in voice, so I am a vocalist as well. All that to say, I am a little bit biased here, but I'm going to try to give as unbiased an opinion as I possibly can. The biggest negative that comes with playing multiple instruments is dividing your practice time. So really it's trying to fit all of that time into one day to make sure that you're practicing each of your instruments equally. Now that doesn't mean you have to practice your instruments equally. You can pick a favorite and practice that one the most and then practice the other ones a little bit. And of course we're going to discuss a lot of ways to kind of maximize the effectiveness of the time you're spending on each instrument. But it can be really difficult to make sure that you are playing each one of those instruments throughout the day. It can be a struggle to practice one instrument every single day, let alone multiple. Another challenge that can come with playing multiple instruments is that you might start getting bored with one instrument when it gets too hard and move to the next because it's easier at the point you're at. So it becomes really easy to plateau on a given instrument. I know personally I really struggled with this with the guitar specifically, because once I got to a certain level with the guitar, I picked up the piano, and piano felt a lot easier in the moment, so I found that I was gravitating toward the piano during my practice sessions instead of actually working on my bar chords, which were really difficult at the time. So something you really have to watch out for when you're playing multiple instruments is choosing to practice the one that's easier in the moment, which is so tempting. If you personally have not gotten to a level where you feel relatively fluid with one instrument, picking up another instrument can mean that it takes a lot longer to get good at the first instrument, because you just haven't spent enough time playing music in the first place. So my recommendation is that if you are deciding to pick up a second instrument, make sure that your first instrument feels relatively comfortable. That doesn't mean you have to be like an advanced player or that you have to be playing super fluently, but it does mean that you have to be comfortable enough with your first instrument that bringing on a second instrument isn't going to derail all of your progress. The last con that comes to me is the fact that playing multiple instruments can get expensive. There are lots of ways to get around this if your budget isn't super high, but it's something to keep in mind that if, for instance, you need a repair on your guitar or if you need your piano tuned, those things can kind of add up. Now for the pros of playing multiple instruments. Again, as I mentioned before, I am super biased because I do play multiple instruments and I love playing multiple instruments, but here we go anyway. Number one is that it makes it really easy to collaborate with other musicians. If you're playing in a band or an orchestra, you'll be able to relate to the other instrumentalists. You'll be able to talk to them in kind of the jargon of their instrument. You'll know the struggles, you'll know the ranges, you'll know all of the things that your other instrumentalist buddy is going through. It also makes the writing process so much easier. So for instance, if you wrote a song and you really want a specific drum part, even if you can't play that drum part really well, it's nice to be able to say, I want the hi-hat here. And if you're playing in a band, but in that band you want to play the guitar, but you also play bass, you can give your bass player tons of information about what it is that you want to hear. And that information can be delivered by either writing it out or just playing it yourself and showing it to that bass player. And if you're playing classical music, knowing the ranges of different instruments is invaluable. You'll also know the types of parts that the instrumentalists in your orchestra tend to play. It's also amazing if you're a conductor or a band leader or a teacher, because then you can really help anyone you need to help. The second pro is that the more you learn on one instrument, the more you can translate that to another instrument. Think of this as being a polyglot, like you speak multiple languages. Once you know the grammar and syntax of one language, you can translate that to another language pretty easily by just picking it up and placing it into a different form. Plus, think of the overlap between Spanish and French and Italian. Once you learn one, you can kind of figure out a lot of the words in other languages. Music works exactly the same. Once you understand the fretboard of the ukulele, you understand the concept of a fretboard. You understand how to find different notes on the fretboard, and you can translate that to the guitar, or to the banjo, or to the bass. If you can play your paradiddles on the drums, you can translate that to another instrument, and it'll make it a lot easier to pick up strumming patterns, for instance. And of course, once you learn the piano, the entire world of music just bursts right open, because the piano is laid out like an Excel spreadsheet. Pro number 3 is that you can diversify your knowledge. So if you have been playing the flute, which is a melodic instrument where you can play one note at a time, it'll be really nice to be able to play the guitar or the piano where you can play multiple notes at a time. Playing a few different types of instrument can make you a more well-rounded musician and can help you to understand things that might not be relevant on the instrument that you started with. It's relatively easy for most people to fit 15 minutes into their daily schedule for practice, or to spend a little bit of time and money on a weekly private lesson. But when you start playing multiple instruments, that time and money is going to run out fast if you don't find ways to make the most of that time. The best way I can think of to save your time and money is to find the similarities between the different instruments that you're playing. If you typically practice for an hour a day, you don't necessarily have to tack on an entire other hour to practice your other instrument. But what you can do is find topics that are translatable to both instruments and practice those things the most. So for instance, if you sing and play the saxophone, one of the best uses of your time is going to be breath support. If you play guitar and piano, one of the best uses of your time is going to be chord building and harmony. And for just about any instrument you play, learning how to improvise and learning how to read music can be insanely helpful, and all of those things are translatable to other instruments. Something else to keep in mind is that if you practice your piano but then don't get a chance to play guitar later that day, you've still managed to keep your fingers dexterous, you've still managed to use both hands to do separate things, and you're still using your brain to think about music. So I'm not saying that you should just give up playing one instrument in favor of playing the other, but what I am saying is that you can find ways to tie those things together, and it doesn't have to be the biggest, scariest, worst thing if you miss a day. When it comes to saving money with music, spending a lot of money on your different instruments can be a really good thing, and you should do it if you can and if you have the budget for it. But if you don't, that's okay. You can find a teacher who can split their time between two different things. I, for instance, teach a few different things, and a lot of the music teachers I know also teach a few different things. In fact, music education majors have to learn a ton of different instruments in order to graduate. If your teacher does only play one instrument, that's also great. It just means that you're going to be focusing on that instrument in the lesson, and that you can talk to your teacher about more holistic things like harmony and ear training. And while your violin teacher might not know how to play the drums, they're probably going to have a lot to say about rhythm. If you're having trouble affording a new instrument, there are lots of cheap instruments available online or through rentals, and you can still learn the piano even if you don't have a Steinway. Now, you won't necessarily be able to use the pedals or the weighted keys on a beginner piano, but if you're just starting it out, that's okay. As long as you're understanding where all of the notes are and you're learning the hand positions and you're learning how to read music for that instrument, you're gonna be able to learn those other things later, and it's gonna be okay. You can even start learning certain instruments like the piano online with like a virtual piano. I will link one below if you're interested in that. But point being, you don't necessarily have to break the bank in order to play a second instrument. The way that I actually started learning multiple instruments was through teaching. I used to teach private lessons at a studio in Rochester, New York, where basically I shared a floor with a bunch of other musicians. And in between my lessons, or when a student didn't show up, I would scoot over and find my friends, and we would teach each other stuff. I was taking drum lessons for a seriously discounted price without actually having to leave my work. I was also able to practice my piano and my guitar in between lessons. Now, of course, I'm still able to do that. It's just from home, because I am stuck at home for the moment. And teaching in the first place is a wonderful way to get better at multiple instruments. When I first started teaching, I was only teaching voice lessons. But in order to do voice lessons, you have to be able to play vocal warm-ups, and you have to be able to at least accompany people a little bit. Though karaoke tracks are great if something is too difficult. But that meant that I was practicing my scales on the guitar really frequently, because that's how you do vocal warm-ups, is just scales and arpeggios. And when I started playing piano, I started doing all of those same things on the piano. And doing scales and arpeggios over and over and over is a really good way to review those basics. You also get a huge challenge from having to learn a new piece of music every single time your student comes into the lesson and wants to sing something new. You can also use beginner lessons to review your basics. If you start teaching beginners, you're going to be practicing your scales every single day, and you bet your butt you're going to be practicing your sight reading. In conclusion, I think that playing multiple instruments is a great way to make yourself a better and more well-rounded musician. Don't necessarily feel like you have to practice each instrument for an hour every day, because you're going to go crazy and you're going to not have any free time for anything else. Instead, find specific topics that you can address in a given practice session, and find holistic topics that can help you to grow as a musician in multiple ways. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to let me know in the comments. Let me know, for instance, if you play multiple instruments, if you want to play multiple instruments, what instruments you play, what instruments you want to play. Make sure to leave a like, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that little bell to be notified the next time I post.